Dragon Ball, horror, kaiju, and more. Steven's Toy Reviews.
Hello there, collectors. It's going to be Steven here, and welcome to my review of Toho Ultimate's Wave 1 Godzilla 1989. I'm very happy to take a look at this figure, courtesy of Super7 sending this out. And with that being said, there's been some divided opinion on Toho Ultimate's Wave 1, particularly with Godzilla here. There's been some note that some folks have not been too happy with the outcome of the figure, while on the other end, there's been some opinions that this figure is amazing and over the top great. Is it on either end of the spectrum, or is it somewhere in between? What I will say is, with all of the Godzilla vs. Biollante hype recently in the community, without a doubt, this one is going to be looked at. So without further ado, let's take a look to see whether or not Godzilla is going to be worth adding into your collection. When it comes to the sculpted detail of Godzilla 1989 here, I will say that the sculpted detail is rather nice. It is more so apparent when we take a look at the Thirsty for Blood Godzilla, which does use the same sculpt, but it does have a better paint application, which I think is the perfect example of when you do have a fantastic marriage of the two, we can really appreciate both more. However, when we specifically talk about this figure, it does have a good sculpt objectively, and when it comes to the paint application, more so specifically when we take a look at the eyes, we are able to see that they did a rather good job of being able to make sure that things like the iris and the pupil are very clearly defined. They did try an effect where it looks like the light is reflecting in Godzilla's eyes, at least I believe that what was the attempt here for the little white dot, and I think that does offset the eyes just a little bit, but nevertheless, I do think that the eyes do look good. Now, when it comes to the rest of the paint application for the head sculpts and the body, I will note that the teeth, at least in terms of the sculpted details, while they do look good, this is the part where we begin to talk about the paint application not necessarily connecting well with the sculpt. Yes, the teeth are sculpted well, however, when it comes to the paint, it doesn't necessarily complement it. You'll see this a bit better when we get to the roaring head sculpt of Godzilla, but the paint application sort of makes it look like there's no individually sculpted teeth here, which upon close examination, we are really able to see that that is indeed the case. So that does hold it back a bit. When we get to the main body of Godzilla as well, upon really close examination, it does appear that there is going to be just a bit of dry brushing of gray. However, when you do hold the figure maybe an arm's length away, 3 feet to 6 feet, let's say, you do sort of lose that detail a bit, and it doesn't necessarily pop as much as it should. There are also some folks in the community who do believe that this figure really does shine almost with a gloss to it, and that can vary depending on the photography or the video that does show this figure. I will say that in hand, it does very much so on the light source. So underneath my studio lighting, I don't really think that it has a lot of shine to it, but I have seen some pictures and videos which does make this appear as if it is unpainted plastic. When it does come to the dorsal plates, we do again have some pretty nicely sculpted detail there, but we don't really have a greatly solid transitioning between the gray that is used on the body and the gray, the bone-ish white that is used for the tips of the dorsal plate. While there is a gradient there, it isn't as strong as it could be. Overall, I do think that the figure really does have good sculpt, but it isn't married very well with the paint application compared to the Thirsty for Blood Godzilla, which came out at the same time. I do think that there is a lot of potential here, but it doesn't necessarily hit its stride to overall be as strong as it could. Now we're going to go ahead and move on over to the accessories, so the video is going to have a bit of a different feel. For the accessories, this is meant to be a complementary piece to the Rose Biollante figure, so we do have some accessories which are meant to be, well, alongside Biollante and in feel with 1989. So as mentioned, we do have a roaring head sculpt, and we do have two other sets of hands, one being more so splayed like he's scratching, and fists, which is really cool. We do also have one left hand for, the hole in the hand, the stigmata, and then we do have a turtleneck of the vines around Godzilla's neck. So we'll go ahead and take a look at the roaring head sculpt, which, like I made mention, we do have the nicely defined teeth in terms of the sculpt, but in terms of the paint application, it does hold it back a little bit, and some folks who have noted that, well, there's one continuous paint app. I'm inclined to not disagree with them there. When it does come overall to the facial features, though, it does look rather nice. When it does come to the turtleneck for Godzilla, I'm affectionately calling that turtleneck, I think it does look really, really cool. Something to keep in mind, though, you are going to have to pop the head off as if you would for changing the head sculpts and put this on first. I think that the little tail, the little wiggly piece, if you will, that is supposed to go to the back of Godzilla's neck, so keep that in mind when you are attaching this. For the hands, you simply pop them off and you put them on when you do change out the hand parts. And the green sort of blood, if you will, for Godzilla's hand part does actually match paint-wise to Biollante rather well. Now, on its own, I think the accessories are good, but it does look a little awkward on its shelf and its own display if you were to just have this figure. So when you bring it together with Biollante, I think this really does enhance the scene. However, when it does come to the moniker of Ultimates, it is a bit disappointing that there isn't some sort of energy or beam effect. So if you are looking for things like a beam effect or other effect parts like maybe water to maybe help recreate a battle scene, you know I have videos to help you out with effect parts and stands. And here's going to be a size comparison of both Bio-Goji and Biollante alongside the Thirsty for Blood Godzilla, just so this way you get an idea of all of the current Toho Ultimates released, alongside some other figures that might be in your collection, and some that might not be that maybe you're considering purchasing. Speaking of the Thirsty for Blood Godzilla, here's going to be a side-by-side comparison of Godzilla 1989 with the Thirsty for Blood repaint, the SDCC exclusive. So if you're interested in taking a look at that figure, I do have the review of that one up, and I will say of the two, I think that the Thirsty for Blood Godzilla is really, really great, and if you're considering picking that one up, definitely check out my review. I think that this is a very, very strong release. Pinjar. We're back with that. So, articulation for Godzilla 89 here. Overall, I think it is functional, and it does get the job done in most instances. However, there are some design choices wherein, with the way kaiju figures, action figures have been for the last decade or so, I'm wondering exactly why they went that route the way that they did. I understand that cost may be the reason as to why they may have made some of those decisions, and Super7 in general has specific ways that they want to preserve sculpted detail and fluidity, but still, we'll talk about that as we go on. And for those of you who may have missed my Thirsty for Blood Godzilla review, which I don't know why you did, because it's pretty cool. There should be a card or something that'll pop up to talk about that. So with that, we already talked about accessories. There's no jaw hinge. We do have the head plugging into the neck here on a ball joint. He can look up about that far, down about that far, rock from side to side, obviously turn. And then this piece of the neck plugs into the body. On a ball joint, we get a little bit of rocking movement forward and back and side to side, but realistically speaking, we're going to get mostly just swivel movement. So I do hope that that is a ball joint. As you can see here, it is, and that's not a swivel, that is loose. Shoulders, they do swivel, which is good. Both of them do that, and they do hinge. As you can see, Godzilla can T-pose and assert his dominance. There is some difference in terms of fluidity, if you will, for the shoulder joints here and on my Thirsty for Blood Godzilla. But something else you may notice is that if you move it here, well, this one's a little bit loose, you can see that the shoulders sort of bounce, if you will. And I'm hoping that that is a feature, if you will, and not a bug, as it's said in the game industry, because if that is the case, then that may be pushing down on the holes where the pegs plug in for the swivel, and that may cause issues down the line. So when you're moving this, if that is an issue for you, move closer to that actual sculpt here to prevent any issues. We do have bicep swivels, which is good, full spin movement. And then when this figure was initially revealed with the renders, a lot of folks were worried about an elbow hinge. The way that Super7, as I just made mention at the top of this section, works for articulation is to try to preserve the sculpt and the overall aesthetics of the figure. So you can see here, this angle, which is how it was initially promoted, it does not look like there's a hinge. However, there is. And you can clearly see that when the arm is fully extended forward. You can see that disc here. Now, with that being said, that is going to be the range of movement you saw forward, up, and down. So that's a little bit better than 90 degrees, but the forearm does have a swivel as well. If you do spin it around, which I did see a couple of people have an issue with doing that, then you do not get the full range of movement that way, but kind of jokingly. It's a broken arm. So just make sure that the swivel is used appropriately. For the wrists, for all the different hand parts, we do have swivels and we do have hinges. So if you were looking to maybe get a little bit of a rocker that way, for any of the hand parts, you cannot do that for this particular Godzilla. Just making a note of that. Some won't have a problem with that, but some may. For the waist, there is not a ball joint, but you can get Godzilla to swivel all the way around if you want. Don't know why you would want that. That's not a complaint, but just an observation. With that being said, you can kind of see Godzilla's pelvis here, if you will, sort of expand, because this is made not necessarily a rubber, I believe, but a softer plastic. For Godzilla's hips, we do have ball joints, so he can kick out about that far and kick forward and back about that far. So we can do the splits a little bit and so forth. We can obviously also turn on that axis. So we don't have a jaw hinge to preserve the sculpt. However, if you take a look at the kneecaps here, when we have that hinge, the single hinge to move forward and back, I would say that looks a bit odd, but nevertheless, we do have ankle hinges to move the feet forward and back, though this was something I didn't really talk about on my Thirsty for Blood review. What I did notice is that it seems like the hinge plugs into the foot down here. As you can kind of see as I'm moving it, you can see closer back to this portion of the foot. It does look like there is a little bit of a gap. That seems like maybe there's some stress going on if you do not move this appropriately. So just be careful so you don't, as the kids say, ham hand this. You don't want to break that. I know that was the same for mumm-ra, the ever living, because I messed around with that more than I should. It didn't break, but just something to keep in mind for there. Now the tail. The tail is rather interesting because this has been a point of contention among some fans, and what I will say, first and foremost, for the range of movement. It does have a whole bunch of ball joints, which is, solid. That's the standard for Godzilla action figures now. But what I will say is that, yes, some movement for some Godzilla figures for the tail is not necessarily super move it in one direction all the way in another, but if I were to really crank the movement one way, there's one issue up over here I'm going to talk about. If you do this to sort of keep the sculpt fluid, that's going to be about the range of movement forward and back. Obviously, you can just mirror that, and that's what we're going to have. If you do want Godzilla's tail to be flat, you can pretty much get that without a real issue. Of course, his tail is going to be up a little bit, but if you do want to get his tail resting side to side, you do have to break up that illusion of the dorsal plates being continuous and fluid. Now, the tail is detached in the box, which isn't really that big of a problem. However, you will notice, and you're probably citing this, that I do not have the tail fully inserted here. Okay, that is something that a lot of people had an issue with, and some people actually did have a problem with the tail joints being loosened up over here. But to focus in back over here, of course, you're probably saying that's user error. Hold on one second. I did insert the tail joint all the way, and that is evidenced as I cited in my Thirsty for Blood review. You can see that it is fully inserted here because I do know how to do that. For whatever reason, quality-wise, this Godzilla's tail just likes to pop out, even when he's in a neutral position. I've come back to this guy a couple days later, and for whatever reason, the tail just slowly likes to pop out, and I'll find him in this position. For some reason, I don't know why. That can obviously vary unit to unit to unit, so your experience may vary, and the reason why I say that is both of these figures are the same sculpt, so I'm not quite sure what's going on there. There is obviously variability, quality-wise, because you can't have everything down to the T for the molds because, injection molding and all that fun stuff. So just something to keep in mind. So overall for articulation, I do think that this Godzilla mold does work. However, there are some design choices when it comes to balancing joint functionality and the aesthetics of the figure, which I'm not quite sure why they went with those specific design choices when there is evidence and precedent that certain joint setups do work. I'm not saying Control-C, Control-V, or Control-X, Control-V from some other brands, but nevertheless, I think that could have worked in Super 7's favor to even continue the R&D for upcoming figures as well. So, buy now, skip, or wait for a deal. I wanted to do this section just a little bit different compared to my usual, just because there's a lot of contention in the community, and I wanted to have a little bit better of a heart-to-heart, if you will, discussing more so particular Godzilla. There's also a lot going on in the tech community at this time, so I wanted to redo this section, and I wanted to make sure that we're kind of teasing out the idea of conflicts, if you will, especially because these were received as review samples. So specifically talking about Godzilla for his pros, I think that this sets a good template moving forward for Super 7, especially when constructive criticism is given over what can be improved for Godzilla moving forward. As well as when it comes to the sculpted details, I do think that it does look very good when we take a close look at it, as more so evidenced by their Thirsty for Blood Godzilla. And when it comes to the painted details, specifically when it comes to the eyes, there are clearly defined areas of the eyes, the iris, the pupil, and so forth, that Super 7 can absolutely nail. When it comes to the other parts of the figure, when it comes to the cons, if you will, there is some differences in the painted detail and clarity in the sculpt when you combine those two things together when we reference the render that was promoted as well as the Paintmaster prototype. And when it comes to the articulation, again, as I said in that section, it's not necessarily a matter of they didn't need to copy what is on the market at this time one-to-one because, well, that wouldn't make much sense. However, it's interesting that they essentially went around the idea of come up with something completely on their own when there could have been a solid reference point for what is already available. Again, there's tooling stuff and cost and so forth that they needed to consider, but at the same time, we do have at least a blueprint for very fluid tail movement, and it doesn't necessarily seem like they nailed that perfectly on the head. Now, should you buy the figure? That's kind of what we come down to in reviews. I have seen wildly different opinions coming from absolutely do not because insert reason here, and coming from the absolute other end of the spectrum, which one of my contemporaries put as don't even listen to the boo birds because this is thumbs up. What I will say is that for Godzilla, there are pros and cons, and I think that you need to look at that in specific for whether or not it works for you. I do think that Godzilla doesn't necessarily land perfectly on that mark for MSRP, which is going to be about $85. If you are looking to pick this up, there are retailers which do offer different methods for you to purchase it below MSRP. If we are looking at larger retailers like Entertainment Earth or Big Bad Toy Store, specifically Entertainment Earth, they are going to offer influencer coupons, which yours truly does have down below, and you can get 10% off if it's in stock along with free shipping. And BBTS, they do have the pile of loot option where you can build a whole bunch of stuff up in your loot and then you can ship it out for $4. We do also have smaller retailers and mom and pop shops, which you may be able to just find right off the top a better price that may be more comfortable to you, as well as maybe possibly talking to them for a more affordable price for you. Again, I don't necessarily think this falls into the area of a bad figure. I think that based on what was promoted and what we had for the final product, I just don't necessarily think that we're quite right there for the cost. When it comes to the manufacturing and when it comes to the research and development, I understand that there may be things that can't be made public. However, when it comes to what we do have here, I'm interested more so in what feedback they will receive and what they will move forward with. So, if you are looking to get this sculpt, I do suggest checking out my Thirsty for Blood review, the Godzilla, because that really shows where this figure, this sculpt in particular, can shine. If you are looking to get these two as a combo, however, as a set, Steven, your camera's over here, then I will say these do complement each other very well. And if you are looking to get these, keep in mind that this is what Super7 really likes to do, with more so simplified articulation and trying to maintain the overall aesthetics of the figure. What I would say moving forward for Super7 for Godzilla figures in general is making sure that the paint application for figures is really great to really enhance the detail and to make sure that when it comes to the articulation, not necessarily copying and pasting what other companies have done, but making sure that there isn't a need to reinvent the wheel because there are schemes that are set up which do work very well. This isn't a bad figure that I would say. I think that it just doesn't quite hit the mark as well as it could. Hey collectors, that's going to wrap up the video today, and as always, thanks for watching, commenting, sharing, subbing, it all helps. I always enjoy responding to comments, so be sure to drop one down below and I will respond if I can. I do have supporters on Patreon as well, and each review gets an end card to show who is supporting each month, so here are the end cards. Camera batteries, SD cards, even hard drives. It's not possible without that support, so thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. Here's the final end card, so this way you can click subscribe, check out another video, or even check out the social media outlets. You know you want to. Before we end today, as in the description, there may be paid ad space, affiliate links, or product samples that were sent out in this video, so please check out the STR ad disclosure. Thanks again for watching, and I'll catch ya in the next video.